Hello again. I've got another video for you in Apple Motion. So we're going to cover today is shapes and masks, mostly masks. I find that there's probably a lot to go in deeper on these. It's often misunderstood how creative you can get with them. As you'll see in the coming clips that I made all these animations in Apple Motion only, so you can get an idea what sort of things you can do. So I'm going to look at converting to control points a lot in this and editing them. I also want to look at the XY relationship between the transform position of a shape or mask and its anchor point. I think that's often overlooked when you start a project. It's always good to make sure you're zeroed out on everything before you start moving things around. And there is a little trick on when you put a camera or lighting onto a project, it changes the groups to 3D, which can often disable a lot of masks. So there's a little trick to avoiding that, so we'll cover that as well. And we're just going to look quickly at the types of shapes there are in masks. Linear, Bezier, B-Spline. There's also mask blending types, which are add, subtract, replace, intersect, that sort of thing. And I also, over the course of this video, we'll be looking at the overlays that we see depending on which tool we choose. If we choose the select transform, we'll see the bounding boxes, and anchor points will show anchor points, and edit control points will show the control points. I think we'll get stuck into it now, so let's look at it. So often I interchange what I call object with shape, image, mask, anything that can be on a group and can be edited. Firstly, I want to look at the XY navigation of a shape. So we see here we have a rectangle, or a square in this case. You can see the control points are there, and as we open up different aspects of the properties or text or the shape here, as we click on the layer, it reveals that in the inspector. So this is where there is that relationship between the position and the anchor point. Generally, when I want to keep something centered, I will make the object, after converting to the points, it'll show us where those points are on the shape, but the anchor point is what the shape revolves around. Down here we're going to go and look at edit points now, and as you see over here, now we have our edit point, which we can play around with as well. And this is just a demonstration of how creative you can actually get. There's several masks, several groups on this, and they're all in 3D. You can see we've got them revolving around in XYZ space. And this is a breakdown of how that happens. We've got our groups, we've got our masks, and as you see, it's quite complex. We can choose the mask from the mask tool drop down. And here is our group. There's a camera up there, and I'm going to show you a bit later how we overcome the camera's tendency to disable masks because of changing the groups to 3D. I hope you can follow. So we have the mask on the group here, so it's there, and here's a mask on the group as well. This means that this mask will mask everything underneath it. We have here a mask on the group as well. This is a mask on the object, the rectangle mask on top of the rectangle, which is here, and all of these are positioned in 3D space. So you can see I've got the Z values here, minus 3000, minus 1800. So you can see there's a bit of a depth to each one of these layers. Here's another mask on the group itself. So this mask will mask everything. As you can see here, it's masking right through the shape, text, and the text that says back wall here as well. And even here we have masks on the generator. This is a cellular generator down here, and we've got a freehand mask which is on the group itself, and this is on the generator itself. So here we've got two different areas that this is masking. That's generally how you can get on with a project, is just knowing in advance what you can actually do with masks. And here is the same image, only looking front on. So you can see how the masks are all there, and this one goes right through these masks here. I've got all these, I've just hit command click. I've done command click so I can leave the groups out of it. So this is just masks and shapes and PNG there and some text. So it's highlighting At the moment, we've got the select transform tool selected, so it's showing the overlays. All these things are bounding boxes and the corner pins. With each tool, you can do a different aspect. Now, I just wanted to briefly touch on this. As soon as you add a camera or a light to the project, this dialog box comes up. One or more masks have been disabled. The shape mask can only be added or applied to 2D groups or flattened 3D groups. So I recommend that before you add cameras, if you need them or lighting, it's best to convert the group. As you see up in the top right hand corner, you convert the 2D group to a 3D group, then the flatten tick box opens up. Then you tick that, and once you flatten that new 3D group, it locks the mask to the shape, whatever orientation it happens to be, and this will prevent the disabled mask when you add the camera or light. I hope that's clear enough for you there. So just remember that before you start adding cameras and lights, just make sure you have all your masks and everything in place and flattened so that they're locked on. And this is the finished product of that little animation I did before, so you can see how it expands out. Now here, this is just a quick look at the mask tab. And you can see I've got two masks. The top mask is set to subtract, so it subtracts away whatever's inside the box, and you can see the background showing through there. But the other one is I've got set to add, and it actually reacts a bit differently so that it's filled in this case. And then we have here where we've got them both on subtract, so they're going to join up, so you can use that often in making complex shapes or animations that way. And then there's a couple more, replace and intersect, which sort of do the exact opposite, so hardly ever use those. So now we've sort of covered the basics, so we're going to look at the anchor points now. Whenever you make a shape or a mask on a shape, the anchor point, it defaults to 0, and then at this point you can move it around up and down the Y or left and right on the X-axis on a 2D. In a 3D situation, which I'm not really going to go too much into, it's the same thing. It's just moving the anchor point into the front and back space, so the Z space. If you want to keep this shape centered, then it's a good idea to match up the position with the anchor point's position, because as you move something off position, it moves off the anchor point, that sort of thing. So as you'll see here in a minute. So just be aware that you may have to adjust both position and anchor point. Just this little sideline, I did a little experiment and I made a shape and I moved the anchor point way out 100,000 pixels. I even did 500,000 pixels, but it was a bit too big for the illustration. Down here in the left there, I lowered the view down to only 1% so you could actually see it. So what you're seeing there is the little shape, and on the right is the anchor point in that image. So that's what 100,000 pixels looks like at 1% of the view. I thought that was a bit interesting, that the 2D space within the canvas seems to be infinite. Not that you'd ever use that much. So the main thing to take away is that the relationship between position and anchor points. You really want to be mindful of the anchor point, especially at the beginning of a project. I think it's always best to have things zeroed out. Here in the Shape tab, I've converted to points in the geometry section of that. So you can see the control points there on the left there, the point 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pertain to the corners of the square. Their geometry or their navigation system is a little different. The center of the square, as I said, starts at 0, and then you can see point 1 is at minus 250 and Y is at plus 250. So that's showing you the 500 pixel size. So what you can do is when you open up that geometry for the first time, which you'll see in a sec, you can actually set the size up. And again, we're moving the anchor point around. As you move position and anchor point, they do actually relate to each other. So this is your toolbar, the tool for the canvas. And as you see, this transform, anchor point, edit points is the one I use to edit the control points. Few others, but I'm not going to go too much into it. It's basically transform, anchor point, and edit points. So in here, I think most people are aware, but I just wanted to point out the hierarchy or structure of the project. You've got your project at the top there. We are in the layers window at the moment. We can go and change certain aspects of the project by clicking the top one and then using the inspector to make your changes. And when you create the shape for the first time, it automatically makes a group for you. So the group controls the shape, and so on it goes that way. So right now I've got the select tool. I'm going to put a mask on there. There's your mask toolbar there. You see there's 5 different types. They can be converted later on. There's really 3 types of masks: linear, Bezier, and B-spline. Circle and freehand is also considered a Bezier. So here we have just a linear. I'll make 2 shapes here so you can see how they react with each other. Now over on the left in the inspector, the mask tab, we can change the blend mode different ways. Most of the times a mask you want to use subtract, so it subtracts away. There could be other uses for the others. And you can see the size there too. Right now it's 222 pixels. You can change that before convert to points. So now you can see the control points pop up there in the inspector as well. And those numbers can be changed. You can set your keyframes. If you've got your edit point tool selected, then you can just move your control points around as you move the playhead, and that will create new keyframes. And like I said, if you want to be exact, you can use the numbers over in the inspector, or if you're just doing it all freehand, then just drag the control point around as you like, and you move the playhead a little bit more, and off you go. Here you can change to a B-spline. You notice the control points are well outside the line, and it really gives you a different type of a curve. It's more mathematical, I suppose. It's really even, whereas a Bezier can have a lot more changes to the actual curve itself. So if you want more symmetrical curves, then use the B-spline. And these can be changed around at any time. The linear and Bezier objects, you'll know them by the fact that they have the control points that are actually on the line itself. So right now we've got the rectangle selected. I've done the control point conversion on the rectangles, and I've added a few control points to the line. You can animate that and rotate that sort of thing, if however you like it. So pretty interesting shapes, and you'll notice the mask sticks to the plane that the rectangle is on. There's your anchor point overlay. Because we've selected the anchor point tool, you notice the directions, the X, Y, Z orientations on those little arrows. So the X is the red, Y is the green, and blue is for the Z. Now we'll look a bit closer at this shape tab, and this also, the mask tab will be there as well. And it's a little different than the shape, but we'll start with the shape. Notice here I'm adjusting the size. I'm going to change that to 500 pixels. And see, it immediately gets large. And as soon as you convert to points, you'll notice that it's minus 250, plus 250, and that sort of things. If you're not sure which control point you're working with, you can just move one and you can see which one it is. If you double click the line, you can add points. Right click the point, and you can get more parameters like smooth and linear. And here I like to use my guides that you drag out of the ruler, and if you put those exactly at 0 and 0, and then you go up to the view drop down at the top and make sure snapping is on, then those control points will snap to the lines there. So again, we've converted to points, and so I like to even those out a bit. It's just easier sometimes to remember, 150 and that sort of thing. So I want to keep this centered again. So I'm going to double click and add a few more points to it. And now you can see the control point, the numbers have increased. If you move the values around, then you can sort of work out which control point belongs to which one. Or you can move the control point, or just hover over the control point. It will tell you the number that it is. Now we've converted these control points by right clicking, and we're changing them to smooth, and that will give us a bit more curvature. And you notice the little Bezier handles are on there, which can be animated and adjusted as well. So this can make for some pretty interesting basic animations. And you can do this with masks as well. So this is just giving you an idea. Right now, if you look at the geometry tab, it's a Bezier shape type. So even though some of those control points are still linear, those can be converted, as you see. This is a little closer look at the control points. I've got in the tool drop down, I've got my edit points tool selected, and that automatically changes the overlay to control points, as you can see. Right now I'm on control point number 3, And this one here, you right click on there and you can change that to smooth if you like. You can delete, you can lock it, you can even use it to set the start point. I like to think of the control points are the object's accountant. It keeps track of the numbers that make up the lines of the shape, and they do use algorithms for each type of shape it is, and that controls the angle or the curve of the lines. There's a lot going on in the background of the computing side of things. You can see the handles are something that we can change around as well. I'll show you in a sec. But you basically, if you have a B-spline line, very smooth is default. That's up in the top right. You have linear, which is just your angle. There's no curvature at all, and you can adjust the roundness on that in the tab, but we'll go into that in a sec. And then you have your Bezier, which is, you have a choice of linear or smooth there as well. Sort of a bit of back and forth on that. But the smooth always gives you those handles that you can adjust around. If you have very smooth, there's a different type of a handle that shows up, which basically adjusts the height of the curve. Like I said, there's a lot of math involved in these points, and they are related to each other, passing on information, what they're doing, and that affects what the next one does, that sort of things. Probably more complicated than you really need to think about. Just know that they are quite complex. So as you see, I'm pulling that Bezier handle line out, and it's flattening the curve out a bit. And if you right click the little handle on the end there, you can get another bit of controls. You can break the handle, and which means that those two handles are separate from each other now. There is quite a good use for this as well. And remember, all this stuff can be animated, if your keyframes have been activated. So here's link handles. So now we've linked them so they're locked again in the position you've put them in. So here we're going to align the handles, and that's going to straighten them out again. There's a bit of interesting control there too. So yeah, basically change it to smooth, and then you've got your Bezier handles which you can play around with. So as I said before, you do all the changes to the Bezier points, then you can start your animation. Once you set your first keyframe and then move your playhead around, then they get added. And this is another quick way of doing it. There is a little record button that's in that toolbar above the timeline. And as you see, you press that, and everything you do, and as you move the playhead and change the position, then you move your control points around, or anything for that matter. Position changes or whatever is keyframed will change, as long as that record button is on, and then you can switch it back off when you're done. Sometimes it's best just to do the keyframe and forget about the record button, because if you forget to turn it off, if you want to make things a bit quicker. So you have your shape type, a linear, Bezier, B-spline, and you can see each one has a distinct look about it. The B-spline has got that roundness about it that is very symmetrical. If you want to get something that's a bit more off shape, like use the linear with roundness, or the Bezier, it's the same shape and same animation, but we're just changing the shape type. And then we've got the roundness up there, which we can play around with as well. Just bear in mind one thing: if you are using the line of the shape, you can use first and last point. That creates a moving line. Down here we've got it. So last point offset, first point offset, you see how the line moves around. You can use that as part of your animation. Just remember that the roundness does affect that, how close it is to the first set point. It's best if you're using the offset to make sure there's no roundness involved. Just to recap, I like to think of the layers panel as a navigator, and the inspector panel is where you make your changes. This is just a recap on the 5 different types of masks that are available. That's in the tool drop down along the menu bar of the canvas. So each one, the rectangular mask is actually with hitting shift, you can create that as a square, and the same with a circle, or otherwise they just drag out as ovals or rectangles. Freehand, you actually have to physically drag the line around. Bezier and B-spline, you just click the dots where you want them. And so there's your different shape types, there's your control points. That's all in the basic geometry tab of your shape tab. So as you see, you're getting some interesting movement there. Each one of those, you can see the linear over there on the left, and the Bezier there. So they all have their own unique curves. So here I just thought I'd finish up with the different group and what they actually contain on each one. So knowing how to deal with your project in this way is very helpful. You got the group, and then you've got the different red, green, blue, and white shapes, and then each of those have their mask on there. You could put a mask on the whole group as well if you wanted to. You see, as we change the tool, the overlays change as well. The shapes themselves are actually rotating, and as I said before, if you command click, you can select whatever overlays you want. You use the tool drop down, whether you want to transform, anchor point, distort, edit points. They have their own type of overlay. In this case, it's the bounding box. And the anchor point has their own overlay showing the orientation. That's quite handy for when you want to set the shape up to rotate or scale away from a certain point. Because they're all selected, they're all moving together. That wouldn't normally happen. You can see the first and last point offset and that little arrow that's floating around the outside of the white shape. Here we have edit points tool, and that's showing you all your control points. And those can be moved around and keyframed and that sort of thing as well. Even though it appears to be complex, once you get the inner workings of masks that are getting disabled because you're going into 3D, and understanding which overlay does what. We're going to leave it at that. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope it was helpful. Sometimes it's difficult doing these videos, knowing what to cover and what's helpful, so I'm just taking a stab in the dark sometimes. So I hope it was helpful for you and you learned something. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.